Hello, everybody.
All right. Welcome back, everybody.
So, Psychedelics Today, Friday edition. I noticed we've been numbering these things for a while. Maybe we'll have to stop that eventually. But what is this, like week 27 or something of Solidarity Fridays? It's like pretty high number at this point.
Something like that.
So, today we got some news to talk about. We'll talk speculatively about a few things and factually about a few other things. And I guess let's talk about how you might be able to support us and help us keep doing this show. We've got some great online education available. We've got Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists available on our site. You can take that at your own pace. It's an amazing course, a lot of experts in there, and we just would love for you to jump in, and you'll have lifetime access. And yeah, we think you'll enjoy it. There's also some great classes on Carl Jung and psychedelics up there, some free classes, 8 common psychedelic mistakes and spiritual emergence or psychosis. So that's all at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. You can buy our books off of Amazon or from our site at Psychedelics Today Shop. There's an integration workbook and a trip journal. Both have been really helpful for our students and some people we've been working with. And yeah, I think that's probably good for now. Or leave us a review at your favorite podcast app. That is always helpful too. So let's dig in, Kyle. Biggest news, I think, is Ann Arbor, Michigan has unanimously voted to decriminalize plant-based psychedelics, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah. Super exciting.
11-0. Sounded like it was at the town council level.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like. There's a video up online that you can see of the council meeting. I started watching it a little bit last night, and yeah, I was just really surprised about the support, which was really cool to see. And yeah, it just kind of, I don't know, for me, it kind of came out of left field. I'm sure they've been working on it for a while. I remember seeing some things.
It's like a 2-3 week runway.
Yeah, and then boom, just pretty sweet to see that. You know, I guess Ann Arbor is it's college town, pretty liberal. So, it's a good place to start if you're in college liberal towns. It's probably the way to go about trying to get these things passed.
Yeah, exactly. Like, imagine if there was a city in every state, even the wildly conservative ones that still think these are plants of the devil or substances of the devil. You can make inroads in these small communities and, just slowly add on additional towns or hit it at the state level. It'd be fantastic. Yeah, and I think it helps that Denver, Santa Cruz, Oakland, all these other sites have made these moves. Because it's like, hey, look, we did this. The world didn't melt down, and people aren't going to jail for religious things anymore.
Right.
Not like all mushroom use is religious, but in a sense it is. But, like it's pretty awesome. And I'm really excited about that. Michigan's a pretty interesting state. Like politically, I think the history is like they've got a lot of labor unions in like the Detroit area, so it's kind of like a little lefty there, but also hit by a lot of really interesting, financial devastation. As the auto industry kind of moved out of Detroit, and the unions kind of like had some issues. Like, yeah, so perhaps Detroit's a great next spot. They don't want to be spending money or shouldn't be spending money on enforcing these laws in Detroit when they probably just don't really have enough funding yet to like keep up with their normal crimes.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know, I guess, how many people have been arrested. I know in this council meeting, I think I heard the police chief say, I think it was around like 7 or 11 arrests within the past year for these substances. So, I heard him say, I think this kind of speaks to what's going on. Maybe it's not really out there, or it's really not a problem. We're not seeing a big impact of people using this, if that's the case. So...
Right. It's an interesting thing. I really hope it continues and more people push this. My caveat that I always want to say is this, for me, is a baby step in the right direction. It's not the end goal. Because, can we really scale plant stuff? Should we scale plant stuff? Maybe. If everybody's legally allowed to have their own psychedelic garden, perfect. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So things like LSD, MDMA are going to like help democratize this stuff. So like, let's, work towards more full drug decriminalization, if not legalization. Start with Portugal. And then I said on a conference the other day, Kyle, I didn't get to tell you this yet. Like I'm still in this kind of cryptocurrency world, so I'm paying attention to language choices. And a lot of folks call themselves Bitcoin maximalists. Like, I think Bitcoin is the one that's going to win. And I'm like, I'm a psychedelic maximalist. I want everything legal. Like, as gross as it sounds, I would like to buy LSD at a place like Walmart or 7-Eleven. If I was ready, it was like, cool. Like, yeah, I'll buy that needlepoint for $11 a hit. Fine. Like, premium. I know it's tested and it's like not that much more. So like, that's my vision. It's going to take us ages if we ever get to a place like that. But that's maybe what I want to call psychedelic maximalist. Like, let's legalize it all, like spend money appropriately on research and help instead of prison and more trauma.
Yeah, it would be nice. And, I think it's important, just to really point out what this initiative or resolution entails, like the lowest priority for law enforcement. I think there has been a lot of confusion about what these initiatives and resolutions really entail. And so, just to really point that out, sometimes people read the articles and then they think it's either legalized or decriminalized to the point like, oh, I could be really open about this. And it's like, it's really to the city or the town. And it just is really saying that's the lowest enforcement priority and not to be able to allocate funds and resources to arresting and prosecuting people that are either growing or using these substances. But again, it doesn't make it okay to, set up a grow op and start selling. We saw that happen. That person in Colorado, perfect example. The DEA came in and, the feds can still come in. But, chances are street level, low level things, nothing's probably going to happen. It's interesting. I remember
Be careful.
Yeah. Be very careful, especially if you're also a professional holding some sort of license, right? That's a really important thing to consider. I remember when I was on the Chacruna Psychedelic Liberty Summit with Joseph Ray, who's an attorney, and I think he was in the cannabis world for a while. I mean, that was one thing he said. He's like, the DEA is not concerned about small street level operations. They just don't have the resources. But, if you do make it well known of what you're doing, and it's one agency you do not want to have come knocking at your door. So just be smart,
Yeah. Yeah. I saw multiple headlines. Psychedelics legal, Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's like, no, don't say that. Like, psychedelics are not legal anywhere in the US. They are illegal almost everywhere in the US. Well, excluding ketamine and cannabis. But you're by making headlines like that and sharing that, you're putting people at legal risk and possibly at physical risk too.
Right.
So keep that in mind, folks. As much as I love this, it's confusing for people. People are notoriously bad at getting nuance.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's just important to really highlight that. But, again, even cannabis, still Schedule 1 on the federal level, right?
Right. And researchers still have a hard time getting quality cannabis. So keep that in mind. Yeah.
But congrats to everybody that made that happen. I think it is one step in the right direction. So I hope more towns and, cities, get this stuff going. But obviously we want a bigger vision and to see all drugs decriminalized and legalized at some point. I was just listening to Rick, at the ICPR 2020, right? That's the conference. I always mix up the letters there.
Nailed it.
Nice. They just published a little video on Instagram, maybe Facebook, some social platform, of Rick talking about his vision of, first like the FDA approval, being able to do this with MDMA and psilocybin. And then I think he was estimating, once we open up like thousands of clinics, being able to offer ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA, hopefully by like, I think he was estimating 2035, we could have legal psychedelics and kind of have that driver's license option, right? Like get your driver's license, you're able to go in a store or a pharmacy, buy these substances. If you fuck up, maybe there's a penalty, kind of like drunk driving. If you're caught doing something dumb with these substances, not respecting them, getting behind the wheel and causing an accident, get your license revoked. And, does make sense, I think, to some extent. But then again, I don't know. I guess if we look at alcohol, there's plenty of people that do a lot of dumb shit on alcohol. So
And they don't even usually lose their license.
Yeah. So I guess why would we be doing that with psychedelics? I don't know.
Right. Like I know people that drive on LSD. I think it's horrifying, but I started hearing about that years ago. A gentleman at a retreat center. I'm like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, are you kidding me? Very proud of the fact that he does it too. I talk to other people who microdose so they don't have to be chugging coffee the way I do. Perhaps that's functional, but it's still a risk factor. You get arrested, you're like, leak it that you were microdosing, and for better or worse, like that's a big risk. So I would be careful around that. Probably not do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think Leary kind of pitched that idea, Kyle, of the pilot's license years ago. And
yeah, it's been around for a while. I still think
it's quite valid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just thought of a new hashtag. It's like legalize Burning Man. Because, like how illegal is that activity often? And, that to me, that seems like the pinnacle of like American culture or global culture in a lot of ways too. Like how much maximal freedom, temporary autonomous zone. Have you read that yet? Temporary autonomous zone by...
I don't think so.
Oh man, it was amazing. It was by like a philosopher who I think publishes anonymously. Let me pull up his name. He might be alive still. What's the dude's name? Taz. Yeah. Hakim Bey. Hakimbey. Yeah, temporary autonomous zone. And it's like, we can just set up a thing like Burning Man to say, all right, this is just us. This is freedom. This is it for a week. Do what you want to do. Don't hurt anybody. Here's our principles. And it's kind of like a voluntary temporary autonomous zone. And now there's police there and like law enforcement presence. So it's a little tricky. You just have to play your cards right. Yeah. Anyway, I think like we should jump to the next thing here on our list.
But congrats, Ann Arbor.
Yeah. Yeah. Please keep it up, everybody. Not trying to be an asshole about like my critique, but it's just, that's the vision that I would like to see. More expanded access, less legal presence, less empire interfering with the rebels. Quick Star Wars thing for you.
There you go.
All right. So next up, article from healtheuropa.eu, title, Psychedelic Association to Bridge Medical Establishment and Industry Gap. It's called the Psychedelic Medicine Association that is launching, looks like next week on September 29th. Yeah. So a number of leaders in the psychedelic medicine field have joined forces with this group, which aims to bridge the gap between the medical establishment, patients, and the industry. And I don't know, does this article kind of name Lynn Marie in there? Yeah, Dr. Lynn Marie Morse
says president
has a quote here.
Yep.
Yeah. So, quote, for us to fully inform those on the front lines of patient care, we have to overcome the stigma surrounding psychedelics, clear up misconceptions about psychedelic medicine, and give practitioners access to the wealth of research being done in the field. So I actually had the pleasure to record with Lynn Marie last week or the week before around this, and it was really cool. So she and I talked about like the lifestyle and like workflow of doctors and how doctors, they float between these 10 to 15 minute appointments max with clients, patients. And like maybe they don't have time to sit down for a 16-hour like course like ours, but maybe they have time to listen to a 10-minute soundbite in between clients or like while they're eating their quick lunch, while they're on the run. And I think as a doctor, she spent a lot of time with the VA. She's got the ability to like, target what that looks like. So I'm optimistic about that, and it might have a really great impact with physicians.
Cool. And so in that podcast, you kind of went over the organization and what their aim and goal is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And that podcast will come out. We've got a backlog in November, but I'm sure you can hear about the group on her podcast as well. Plant Medicine Podcast. And it's just really cool to see that this is moving along and that different niches are being filled out. Like we need a really big ecosystem to catch up to this gap that we've got. Like it's really wild to me that there's not much education available. It's not very democratic. You have to travel often, or it's like wildly expensive. And, I'm glad there's groups out there like this that, will address thousands, if not millions of doctors.
Yeah, much needed, much needed. So thanks, Marie, for putting this together. And it sounds like they have a free kind of launch virtual event to celebrate the day with a bunch of different speakers in the industry. So you can check that out, psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. Go over there and register. And I think they're including folks from the Ayahuasca Foundation, Field Trip, Fluence, Heroic Hearts Project. Let's see, Magic Med Industry, Maya, Microdose, Scylla Health, SciTech, The Conscious Fund, Unlimited Science, and Vets.
Yeah, so it's a fair amount of partners. Yeah. So, yeah, let's see what happens. I really hope they can make some big things happen for us. Yeah. Cool. Up next, this one's going to be hard for me, but maybe not hard for you. But
I don't know. Yeah, some of this
Psychology Today. Yeah, it's incredible. It's but let's see what we got. So, Psychology Today article titled "This is Your Brain's 5-HT2A receptor on LSD or psilocybin." Subtitles: Scientists pinpoint how psychedelic drugs bind to 5-HT2A serotonin receptors. So it looks like they did a lot of imaging and modeling to get here, and some newer technology helped. But what was your takeaway from this one, Kyle? I know you spent a little bit more time studying this topic than I did.
It sounds like they just were able to create like a 3D image with some of this new technology to really kind of understand how, these substances are binding to the 5-HT2A receptor. Yeah, I was digging into the actual, so this was an article that was published on September 17th in the journal Cell. I actually first came across it. One of my neuroscientist friends sent it over to me, and I was trying to read it. I was like, whoa, this stuff's really kind of over my head, actually reading it in the journal article. But it just sounds like they were able to create kind of like a new image on how these are binding to the cells and whatnot, to the receptor sites. And so they said this really sets the stage for the discovery of new kinds of antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs, which, is really interesting. And then here in the Psychology Today article, I found this to be interesting. They didn't go into too much detail with it, but they said, these findings could also help explain the underpinnings of hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, HPPD. And, that's something that we've been kind of like researching and focusing on. So I'd be interested to hear more about that. I was trying to actually scan the article and I didn't see too much of it in there. So I don't know where they got that from, or maybe I just missed it.
Right. And that's highly speculative, right? Because this HPPD topic is very misunderstood, or like, you've put in a lot of time to try to understand HPPD and it's still not clear what's going on there. And is it a receptor site thing? Like, can we throw something else in there in the brain? It's, all right, cool. HPPD is over. It's like, I don't know. I kind of don't think so, but time will tell.
Yeah. And so I think being able to understand how LSD, psilocybin, and some of these serotonergic psychedelic drugs are able to bind to the receptors, maybe down the line that helps us develop new drugs to bind to those receptor sites. Maybe we're able to create new novel compounds that are non-hallucinogenic. And, they kind of state that as well. And, we've gone over that in the past, like, especially for like somebody that's suffering from cluster headaches, that might be actually a really great application to have a new drug to be able that binds to these receptors if that receptor site is somehow affecting the cluster headaches, just to be able to have a new drug that isn't like a 12-hour trip, right? Or a 4-hour, 6-hour trip. Just being able to take a medication that is helping without the whole psychoactive or psychedelic effect. So, I think that is important. And there was an article that I was reading about it as well, just thinking about some of these like non-hallucinogenic, drugs. And I know we've chatted about this a whole bunch in the past, but yeah, just saying like, if we could come up with like a new class that could kind of fit more, I guess, clinically. And I was thinking about it a little bit more. And it's like, how could that also be like a stepping stone if we were able to find maybe like these new class of drugs that could just help with depression, anxiety a little bit better than what we have, just to get somebody maybe stabilized, and then if clinically appropriate, be able to then move into more kind of psychedelic psychotherapy. But I think I think it is important to explore these substances, and I know it's up for debate, the whole, ketamine thing, just creating new novel compounds and maybe trying to take the dissociative effect out of the substance, but also just thinking about clinical application, and people are suffering, and having lots of tools in the toolkit can be really helpful.
Right. And this is like a really interesting ethical topic, right? Like, a lot of folks think it's unethical to make these new drugs because we already have them. And then is it ethical to say that, because we have mushrooms and it might treat and help a lot of people with cluster headaches, that those people need to have a psychedelic experience to, get symptom relief? Like that seems a little like rough to me. Like, is it the case that people need psychedelic experience? It's like, no. Like, I would prefer that more people have psychedelic experience, but I don't think it's like an ethical obligation for more people to have it, or that, in order to deserve healing, you need to go through that potentially torturous or difficult experience, or joyous experience. It doesn't have to be bad. It's, there's a lot there. And just thinking that people have an obligation to have the experience is a little whack to me. I don't know. I think that's a big ethical discussion we could have.
Yeah, I think so. Just even coming back to like somebody's tolerance, maybe it's not right for them to have that experience, but if understanding how these drugs work and being able to produce potentially other novel drugs to treat depression and anxiety without that, I think that we should explore that. And, I definitely have to check my biases. I mean, I come from the transpersonal world, and I think, there is some sort of magical healing effect in those experiences, but also have to pull back and say, this also isn't for everybody. And sometimes that doesn't work for everybody. And we need other tools that might actually work better. And I always kind of come back to this book, I think it's just called Narrative Medicine by Louis Mel Madrona. And this kind of stuck out to me a while ago, but he was just talking about medicine in general. So he's a psychiatrist. I think he worked emergency medicine, but kind of weaves in a lot of Native American healing. And one thing he said was like, when it comes to medicine, like we really have to like understand somebody's narrative. So if say Tylenol fits into that person's narrative and their belief system, Tylenol is going to work really well. But if it doesn't, the person, their belief system, it's probably not going to work that well for somebody. And so just kind of even thinking about that, right? If somebody just does not want that experience. Yeah, right. Is it ethical to try to push that onto somebody when, are there other tools that could be potentially more beneficial for them?
Right. Like in normal medical practice, it's like you have to account for the side effects. Primary effect is hopefully cluster headaches don't come back. Secondary effects, which would be a side effect, is tripping really hard, like on 3 grams or plus. So yeah, it's a big deal. And people, that's why I'm okay with a lot of these pharma companies coming on and making analogs. Like, I hope there's not price gouging. I hope it's fair. But I understand their businesses and they have to make money back. So it's, it's complicated. That said, they're ginormous companies that, it's hard to square these huge companies with life on a tiny planet flying through space. So it's a really tricky dichotomy, though I always want more drugs available to people to help with new things that might have better side effect profile.
Yeah. There's a quote here. So, on this other one, genetic engineering and biotechnology news. But towards the end, just thinking, and, I think we bring this up just about neuroscience in general, how it's a pretty, new field. And I think our understanding of the brain is still pretty new, and we're still trying to understand it. But I just kind of like this quote here towards the end of this article. It said, the more we understand how these drugs bind to their receptors, the better we'll understand their signaling properties. This work doesn't give us a whole picture yet, but it's a fairly large piece of the puzzle. So
Right.
we don't really know what's going on there, like really understanding the mechanism. Okay, so it binds to that receptor, but actually what's actually going on there on a deeper level, right? But at least we understand that these substances bind, and I guess when I think about it, so you could say that these bind to the 5-HT2A receptor. Does this have an antidepressant property? But then we throw in the other factor of the default mode network. Does the 5-HT2A receptor, I guess, regulates default mode network? I don't know enough about neuroscience to know that. And then, so what's that explanation? How does that explanation play into part of the therapy, right? So what is going on there? Is the 5-HT2A that we're focusing on? Is the default mode network that we're focusing on? Are they obviously connected to some extent? But yeah, what is going on there? I think it's pretty complex.
The hard problem of consciousness is still there. Like, what is mind? Where is mind? What is consciousness? Where is consciousness? Like, really big questions. Like, we know mind appears real. We know consciousness appears real, but what is that? There's a lot of questions left. Philosophy of mind and neuroscience are not really communicating too regularly. I saw headlines. Oh, look, LSD finally solved. We know how it works now. It's like, well, yeah, kind of, but not really. Because we don't even know what mind or consciousness is. A lot of people will say, no, we figured that out. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think we got a while left.
Right.
Most people are willing to say mind equals brain and use it interchangeably. I think that's pretty common parlance. But I'd suggest people check it out. Dig in a little bit to philosophy of mind and limitations of neuroscience in mind.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do neuroscience. We absolutely should. But making conclusive statements like, oh, cool. Since neuroscience said this, then God isn't real. It's kind of a goofy argument.
Well, I guess I always Stan's perspective on it, the television set, right?
Yeah.
You can't dig into the television to find, say, the monkeys on the screen. They don't exist. But I mean, at least if you can tear into the television and understand how that is functioning, maybe you understand how to tinker with it a little bit more. But then, where does the stream come from? Right. And so I think that's the analogy of consciousness and mind. It's the brain is more mechanical to some extent. We can tinker with it. We can understand the mechanisms, but then where does mind and consciousness come into play? And then how do those two interrelate and interact with each other? And that's the fascinating thing. I definitely have just gone down these rabbit holes trying to figure all this stuff out. And I think I do appreciate the neuroscience, and I think sometimes I push against it just for understanding it from my perspective, is just thinking about the near-death experience, for example. Here's an experience that I had that was so profound, that felt so real. And for me, I spent a lot of time digging into some of the brain science behind it. And then it just left me feeling like that experience wasn't real. It was just a firing of different chemicals, physiological reflexes of the brain, and, maybe some oxygen deprivation. There's all this stuff, but on a soul or consciousness level, I mean, that was real for me. And so I always kind of saw some of these, mechanisms as, and I think, I don't know, maybe Rick Strassman or somebody kind of put this forward. I know a couple of weeks ago we were talking about that book, Inner Paths to Outer Space, but seeing them as vehicles, right? If you had these neurotransmitters and stuff firing and binding to receptors, could those be vehicles to shift consciousness in a sense? How is it doing that? And I don't know, to me, it's interesting, but then there's that problem of, that hard problem of consciousness. Well, what is it? can we just really affect it through neurochemistry? Yes, I guess. I don't know. It's complex.
So I always come back to Huxley's like mind as consciousness reducing valve. So like as soon as you expand your mind, you're like, oh, mind is a lot bigger. And okay, interesting. And then you come back, you're like, oh, okay, cool. So receptor sites are neat. Like, how do you square these things? Big questions, no real answers. Just so like in our experience, Kyle, to like make this a little more understandable to folks, because I'm sure it's confusing that we keep bringing this up. There are experiences that have been had in holotropic states of consciousness, from breath work to shamanism to psychedelic states, that bend the model of reality that we typically operate from. So it pretty much says our explanation of reality from the scientific materialist point of view doesn't work. So we started seeing physics kind of accommodate that with things like faster than light communication in like particle accelerator models. So like quantum entanglement, showing that there's spooky action at a distance. So things like 500 miles apart communicate faster than light, which shouldn't happen. And then there's all sorts of other things, that happen in psychedelic states. Like, why would that person understand their birth to that extent, or have visions from their near-death experience that science says they shouldn't be able to have? Because it's, they're getting data from 2 rooms over. Or like this whole thing with reincarnation about kids. Like I feel really weird about reincarnation, but there's a lot of stories of children coming out and having memories and like insisting on tracking them down. And sometimes they're able to validate their stories that have never been recorded. And there's, Stan's work plays with this to say, hey, like maybe there's something outside of space and time that we're not accommodating for in our models. And our models could be better if we accommodated those. That's this whole like paradigm shift argument, like Thomas Kuhn's The History of Psychedelic Revolution or something like that. How like essentially old paradigms will become phased out when there's just overwhelming evidence. And we're still working on that. We've got a lot more people doing psychedelics now. So there's going to be a lot more case reports and stories. And, hopefully in time, we can shift that narrative and get to the next paradigm, whatever that is. I don't really know how we're going to merge all these things, but at least we can say, okay, cool. Therapists, you need to know that weird shit can happen. Same thing with shrinks. Like psychiatrists need to know this stuff too. Like but what does that mean? And how does that influence how they're practicing their trade? Like, I don't know. Time will tell. Like, I think a more holotropically informed practice is good. Like understanding Groff's work would be a great place to help transition. I don't know. Mm-hmm. End rant for now, I guess.
Yeah, it's all exciting and just very complex at times. Yeah, and just kind of going back to that, like, I guess that metaphor of like the TV set. I think it's important to try to figure out maybe like how to improve it and how to tinker with it. And so, yeah, definitely not dismissing neuroscience. I definitely like to follow it. And I think it is important to understand all this stuff. But then I always am left with some of these deeper philosophical questions, I guess, and going, well, okay, that explains a little slice of it, but I'm still really struggling with this part of my experience. I think that's where I get caught up in it, and where I start to question even, okay, so what does that even mean? We understand these receptors. Like, doesn't really help me understand my experience. And I think that's something that like Lenny said a while ago, coming from Whitehead, where he's like, to understand the fundamental nature of reality from the Newtonian Cartesian paradigm, we start with atoms. And his thing was like, I don't know, you ever see an atom before? If you didn't have a microscope or anything like that, you probably wouldn't have or seen pictures. But like, I guess from the Whiteheadian perspective, to understand nature is to start with psyche, to start with experience. And I think that's why maybe Lenny kind of is, I think the one thing that he was really saying is like Whitehead kind of approaches physics from a psychology perspective, right? And that's what makes it so different than, traditional physics and the way people approach it, because they're approaching it from a more mechanistic perspective versus this experience perspective. So I don't know, something to simmer on.
Yeah. Like start with experience and move up. And yeah, like to say, yeah, neuroscience, please keep going. Just to clarify a point, like you are dealing with the most complex organ in the known universe. So, great job and keep it up. We need to understand this thing and we should understand it as well as possible. Like if someone has a car accident or, a tree falls on somebody, like it would be amazing to be able to heal their brain so that their mind works well. Same thing with body issues too. We still have a lot of basic science around body stuff outside the mind. So yeah, please keep going. I want to dissuade you, discourage you. It's just, it might not be like the ultimate project you think it is. Just put it there. Yeah. So next up, and I feel a little weird talking about it, but it's money stuff. We got to talk about it. Compass Pathways, Peter Thiel, who's, the kind of boogeyman for a lot of people, is part owner there. And they, I think, just listed on the NASDAQ last week, and their value jumped 71% post IPO. So like, what was I seeing here? Like, it looks like they opened at $23 roughly. Well, actually, is that true? $29 maybe. Yeah. On Friday the 18th. So it's really only been on the market a few days. And it spiked at 39, something like that. Maybe
Something
let's
like that.
Pull up a better thing here. 42 maybe. No. 42.75 is the exact figure. So peaked on that on Wednesday, the 23rd today. And now it's down at like 37 as we record. So like, kind of a roller coaster, but the valuation has gone up tremendously. What does that say? They did a great job marketing. They did a great job, packaging their story. They've got a bunch of people on their board that are, reputable enough to attract that kind of attention. And seems like the economy is ready for like these new bets on psychedelics. Like people see like pharma, like traditional pharma hasn't really had too many amazing like wonder drugs in the past 20 years. And now we're starting to see more promise from psychedelics. So I think that's what's going on there. Did you have any takeaways from the Compass thing, Kyle?
Nope, just interesting. And I think for the folks that are, following the business aspect, maybe it's something you're interested in, just kind of staying up on what some of these companies are doing. And, if you're into investing or thinking about, hey, maybe I want to check this company out. And I know Compass, I guess, within our circle, kind of has like a bad taste in most people's mouths, and maybe not rooting for it, but there are some people out there that might want to, invest in it because they see the potential there. So, yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth about a lot of these things, and I just think about some of these companies going public, and it's like, it's exciting because I think maybe the more money that goes in there, and might see a lot of innovation, right? Sounds cool. But yeah, but I mean, something that we always come back to is like intention and kind of like integrity and how are they going to move forward. And so I think that's something just to kind of like keep a pulse on.
It's really hard to stay ethical when you're publicly traded.
Yeah.
Kind of can, but you kind of can't as well, especially in a space like this. Like as soon as you go public, you're then legally obligated to all of your investors to maximize shareholder value. So you, as leadership in this organization, could get sued and like found liable for like, not keeping up your obligations to them. I think they call it a fiduciary responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't put restrictions in place, like, okay, you really need to lock down psilocybin. So like you need to spend money on fighting decrim nature. We haven't seen any of this stuff yet, but we kind of like speculate that it might be there, or just limiting access, just saying like only psilocybin from this factory through this company is okay. And like, that's kind of the freaky part. Like, are they going to restrict everybody else's access to this stuff? It's hard to say if it will or not. Thankfully, we've got USONA doing the open source thing with like open source pharma production of this thing, psilocybin. We've got like various price checks in on them, so they can't like price it too high. But it doesn't mean we're not concerned. Like, if you look at the software world, big software companies are constantly suing each other over like patent violations. So like Samsung and Apple have been in like lawsuits for the past 15 years, probably over smartphone stuff. It's like, what does that mean?
Right.
And like, will that apply over here in psychedelic pharma? Which is quite possible. Like, it's really early days and we don't know how these groups are going to act. What's good is that we know that people are watching, and psychedelic people will get really loud if something unethical happens, like Johnson & Johnson's S-ketamine or whatever, Spravato.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders got really loud about that one. So if there's, missteps, expect people to get really loud. But, largely I want these companies to have these things available. Like, we need their money to get it through trials. Otherwise, we're not going to have good drug trials. And, honestly, really good science, if we're being like straight up. Like, I guess the troubling part, though, is like, look at all this free work that everybody did and made available everywhere. And now these groups are using all that and not sharing their science, because that's how like intellectual property works and research works. And, they've got to maximize shareholder value. So why are they going to like leak trade secrets or industry secrets or whatever? So a lot of considerations, having spent a lot of time in software, I got to see a lot of this stuff, and, I can imagine it going really sideways or imagine it going really well. Like, well, time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just thinking about part of the social justice aspect that we sometimes have been focusing on with these episodes, just, from that perspective, just thinking about taking a lot of Indigenous underground knowledge and then trying to, not pay it back. Right. I came across this article on investors.com talking about psychedelics drugs facing, profitability, like not being able to possibly profit, because a lot of these things are, plant based. And so, they're really talking about like trying to create all sorts of different patents and just tweak molecules and how can we patent it. But then just thinking about like thousands of years of history and ancestry that we're standing on. Right. And just kind of makes me think about that quote I came across. I think it was on Chacruna, just thinking about like Maria Sabina growing up in poverty and ultimately dying in poverty, while, Compass Pathways is coming in and trying to patent psilocybin and probably going to make a shit ton of money off of it. So just thinking about that, and, we could talk even about cannabis, for example, too, right? How many people are, still facing jail time for cannabis related charges, while there's people that have made so much money in that field. So yeah, things to consider. I mean, it's tricky, I guess, when these things start to become mainstream, when they've been in the underground for so long, and then just feeling like betrayed, I guess, or not really like, I was just talking about this with somebody, just how much value comes out of the underground and Indigenous worlds. And, do we actually pay respect to that at times? It's like we're trying to reinvent the wheel and thinking that, oh, we're doing this. It's like, well, it's been around for a while, and there's people that have been operating within the underground and Indigenous communities that have been doing this for so long. It's not relatively new. Yeah, sure, like we're adding some new value here and there, but I mean, it's been around for a while. So how do we also like pay respect to those who came before us and have put their lives on the line for the work? So,
right. Yeah. Recognizing the people that came before us is a big deal, because this is, there's a lot of sacrifice, real lot. Yeah. Kyle, I have a question like this. So it's complicated, but our tradition, right? Like essentially starts with Hoffman, like the Groff tradition, like Hoffman sending all the drug companies sending the samples all over the world to say, what can you do with this? And then Groff kind of like figuring it out and like having a nice model, like with his whole team there in Prague, and then, developing it further in Maryland. And then like, how do we balance that with like these traditions that have been around for a lot longer using different molecules and plants, like, psilocybin or ayahuasca, for instance, like, it seems like two very distinct paths, but often the talk track I see in the psychedelic world is that because it's been around for so long, like Groff doesn't necessarily deserve as much credit or respect as maybe Maria Sabina does. Like, how do we balance that? Like, I'm a little confused about it personally. Like, I don't have a good spot to land on there, but there is a tradition. Like, she's an inheritor and purveyor of a very rich tradition that's still around today.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think on that topic? It's hard.
I guess the way that I look at this, and I'm trying to put this together. It's big. So I guess the way that I look at it is we can look at like psychedelic psychotherapy, this lineage that really kind of stems out of LSD and MDMA work, right? So here, and we could even say ketamine too. Like, and I think this gets into like some of the maybe like cultural appropriation stuff or topic. It's like, can the plant medicines kind of stay somewhat in that indigenous, religious, spiritual realm, where the psychedelic psychotherapy is its own form of lineage? And then how do we also like claim these medicines like MDMA and LSD and, maybe and ketamine too, right? Like maybe that is part of like Western lineage, right? And how do we, if we want to like approach that within that therapeutic context, how could we, I guess, really own that and develop like, these processes around there, and really looking at like Groff and that whole lineage there with LSD. And it's interesting that, we don't really explore LSD, mainly because of the length of time and how much resources it really entails if we're doing it within that psychotherapy container. But then I also think about how long have humans been working with non-ordinary states of consciousness? And that's been around. I mean, I feel like it's part of our birthright to be able to work with that. And so just even thinking about, I guess, just honoring that humans have been using these substances with different rites and different techniques and different containers. And so I guess even thinking about like from the psychotherapy like perspective, like, from I know some, I guess, like anthropologists will say that like shamanism or shamans were kind of like the first psychotherapists, right? And so I don't know. I guess the way, and this is kind of confusing. I'm still trying to like put this all together. So I guess the way that I view it's like, how can we like from a Western culture, like I guess like claim our medicines? Well, and we'll just say that's MDMA and LSD and ketamine, since they've more semi-synthetic and developed, versus these more indigenous, spiritual, religious use cases with plant medicines. And how can we really honor that and respect that as well? And maybe that's part of, a different lineage and can operate within that context. Instead of like, I guess the psychotherapy lineage or, this pharma lineage really trying to take it from and saying, oh, we've invented all this and now this is ours, and trying to like reclaim it as that, versus maybe really focusing on our own story, our own lineage, our own narrative. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It's a good start, right? Like I honestly think this is a book project that somebody should take on, like a PhD thesis somebody should write about. Because like when Gordon Wasson came out in Life magazine in 57, right? And Hoffman was what, 45 or something, 44? And, that means that pharma was sending this stuff around even before like Maria Sabina was popularized. So it's like a really hard timeline thing for me to work out. And, maybe the answer is that cheap answers abound and that real answers are going to be hard to land on and require a lot of work to get to. Like I'm reading this book on the Greeks now, and it's like just amazing to see the scholarship and the nuance that goes into a lot of these arguments. And, we see the same thing in these neuroscience articles. There's so much in there, so much depth that it's not an easy answer. And like scientific things answer very specific questions not general, broad, sweeping theories. So, like this is going to be incremental. It's something we have to work at. I think we do owe indigenous populations a great debt. Like if we look at the impact ayahuasca's had on American culture and even mushrooms, like it's amazing. It's been really transformative in a lot of ways in a lot of places. And it's been the medicine that a lot of people needed. And it's not LSD, it's not MDMA, even though those had huge impacts as well. Same with ketamine. So maybe we look at like the overall picture of the impact on the country and then like, or Western culture in general, and then track back like where should the ethics and credit live, and how do we do honor? How do we, give at least a nod to these traditions? I'm not saying, all right, cool, yeah, pharma, like LSD, sweet, like candy flipping, cool, let's trademark that because we invented it. It's like it's a little silly. It's a weird game that everybody's playing, and finding out how to be authentic in that space is a really big deal. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest questions, I guess.
Yeah. And I don't know it's a big question. I don't really know, but I think it's something to explore and to really dig into, and I think, I guess when I think about it, like I'm always trying to, when I'm making decisions or thinking about like what I'm doing, I'm always thinking about like my teachers and that lineage. Like what would they think about if I did this? And I think that if you come from a lineage, maybe that's how you kind of start thinking. It's like, but when you don't have that, you're just like, I can kind of do whatever I want. And like, I can just, it's whatever, versus like kind of feeling like you do come from some sort of lineage perspective. You're like, I have to honor this and hold this and maybe try to walk with some sort of integrity versus just thinking like, doesn't matter. I can just do whatever I want. We'll take these medicines, patent them, and just, F those people.
Right. So this is the kind of thinking I would like executives at big psychedelic companies to have. Like, and perhaps give a public nod here and there. I know that's a really hard thing to do. Your shareholders might not like that, but the community will like it. And if you want like a lot of allies, like you got to make some friends and make some moves, some gestures of good faith, because everything that everybody else has done has been freely given and shared. Like Arrowhead, most of our stuff, 95% of our material is free. Like it's kind of a big ethic in our space, sharing. Like that open science initiative is a great, position. It's like, look at all this science that you're now pulling in to make money from and not giving back, other than like giving us a product that we can buy for, that might be overpriced. I don't know.
I guess what does it look like, from say like a capitalistic point of view? X company develops a patent and then X other company goes over and wants to use that. What usually happens, there's usually a lawsuit, right? That entails. But if X company goes to say an indigenous and underground community and extracts information, and then they go use that to profit, well, what really happens there? Not much. That the bigger company that has all the money usually will just kind of dominate. But I don't know. So something to think about, right? Like, you have this patent. Well, what happens? Where did that information come from? And what if like that person that it came from started to want to use that in any capacity? Chances are that big company is probably going to try to put some sort of lawsuit out. And so things to consider. But I guess that's the issue, right? Like a lot of people that are probably working within that container, they don't have the money to go sue a company, right? They've been operating maybe in an illegal paradigm, and they're not going to put that out there to risk it. But so maybe just even kind of thinking about it from that perspective, like, all right, you run one of these big companies. What if somebody came in and extracted information from you? How would you feel? You'd probably get pissed and want to sue them. So, like, think about what you're doing.
Yeah, think about what you're doing. Think about who you're working with. Do their values really line up with yours? And there's been a lot of press on this lately. Like, oh, cool. Like, you got money enough to have a conference and you invited everybody. Like, how well do those people contributing to that conference know that person? And, what goes on there? What's the result of your conversation and contribution? Like, it's hard to really do this because we're like a really giving culture. but it's challenging to pin all that down. This might be a good place to stop, Kyle. What do you think?
Yeah, we're about at an hour, so yeah, maybe this is a good place to wrap up.
Great. So thank you, everybody. It's been fun. If you want to help us out, leave us a review on whatever podcast app you're using to check this thing out. Facebook and Google reviews are also lovely for us. And if you want to support us financially, you can leave a small monthly donation at patreon.com/psychedelics today, or check out our amazing classes over at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And you can get there from Psychedelics Today website or like our socials. So check it all out. We've got a lot of stuff there. We really want to help you take the next step in your career towards like a psychedelic career. And yeah, whatever that means for you. So psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And yeah, if you have any questions, psychedelics today email at gmail.com, where we solved our recent spam problem. So we should not miss any more of your messages. What was it? 15,000 emails a week?
Something crazy like that. Yeah.
Might have even been more.
I don't know.
I was like, I don't know how we're going to do this.
And I did spend one day
But-
skimming through them all, and it was a headache because I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss any. And I did find some important messages in there. So, but after I deleted all that and then saw like another 13, 15,000, like, I'm not doing this on a weekly basis.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's really hard. So we're working to get better at communicating with you all. If you email us, like, we can't respond to everybody, but we try. And we're kind of building our team so we can make sure you get what you need from us. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Kyle. And we'll see you all on the next episode. John Kyle signing off for Psychedelics Today. Bye, everybody.
Take care.